I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. On this video, we're back to the bodywork on the 70 RT Challenger. So if you saw the last video, we dialed in the metalwork, we got everything really close, and then we bodyworked the gaps and the lead joint areas. So those are the only areas we touched everywhere on this, and then we ended the video with spraying slick sand on this entire car. So that was first epoxy primer, we stripped it down, then slick sand. So we used a chemical adhesion. This car has been sitting for quite a while. As you could see, there's certain areas like the roof, the hood, and actually the whole driver's side is blocked already. So we're gonna go over what I've done on the rest of the car on this whole passenger side that needs to be finished. And then we're gonna wrap up the video by throwing a 2K high build primer right to finish it out on this video. So this would be like the second round of the bodywork phase. So video 2 on bodywork. So what we're doing right now with the slick sand, like I said, minus the door jambs and everything else where we worked heavily, we're now focusing on the fine imperfections on the stamp panels and other areas that we might have missed now that the car's in one color. When it's stripped down to bare metal and it's worked and you're just kind of see weld everywhere, you don't really see the imperfections till it's all in one white smooth color at the same time. So right now, what the eyes can't see, the blocks are gonna show us. So where we're at, we're using a bunch of blocks. Like I said, I've been using the linear blocks. The technique is more important than the block itself. You do want a quality block if you're trying to block a straight panel. Now, saying that, I mostly use blocks that can curve, because if you look at a Challenger, for instance, every panel on this car has some curvature towards it. So I like to just roll with the curves. We will be using a bunch of the Dura blocks. We got the foam blocks down there. Like I said, I don't think there's just one block or a set of blocks that's gonna do a whole car. So pick and choose your battles, find a block that's gonna fit it. Go back and watch my Bodywork 101 video on the basics of blocking. We're gonna skip a lot of that. This video is more focused on the process. So, like I said, now that we're in the slick sand, what's already been done and what's gonna happen on this video, we're using 180 grit sandpaper. So you can use 220. We're following the TDS on the slick sand. We went about 2 weeks, 3 weeks till we first started blocking. The slick sand needs at least a week to shrink up before you could start blocking. The restoration industry is not a fast-paced industry. Doing high-quality paint jobs are not a rush thing. Now, saying that, you don't need the car to sit for 8 months before you touch it. But so what we ended up doing, once it sat for a little bit, it was safe, it shrunk up. We went out with the 180 and we started blocking it. I started with the roof and worked my way to the trunk. We just jumped around on the car. I'll show you that technique. What we're finding the high and low spots. So right here, you can see where the gray epoxy is. Our base was a gray epoxy. That's what we're looking for. When we hit the gray, when we start seeing gray, we're gonna stop. Now, this right here is where the roof brace is, okay? So the roof support underneath, you saw we installed that, we glued it, it's pushing up ever so slightly on the roof. Again, if you don't have a high slick paint job, you might not see it. But if we do a really nice smooth paint job, this is gonna show up as a wave because it's ever so slightly high there. And then right here is where we end up filling it. We're using dolphin glaze at this level. You saw when we did the door gaps and everything, we were using just a body filler. Evercoat Ultra Rage is what we were using there. Now we're gonna use the dolphin glaze. The dolphin glaze is gonna lay out really smooth. There's gonna be no pinholes and everything right now. What we're really hoping for is just very fine. We're just fixing the very imperfections that we can't even see. There's 1 or 2 spots I might have to go back with a hammer and dolly, mostly a hammer, and just tap down. We do, saying that, I do have my hammers. Don't be surprised in this phase. You might use a shrinking hammer. I get some success out of it. It's not the end of the world, but right now we shouldn't be taking a welder anywhere on this car. On this phase, we might be using a hammer on an area we might have missed that might have been a little bit too high, just tapping it. If we run into that, I'll show that part of the process. But what we're gonna do, we're gonna block down. You're gonna see our roadmap and how we're gonna do it. We're gonna find our high and low spots. When we hit our epoxy underneath our slick sand, we're gonna stop. We're gonna stop what we're doing, and then we're gonna address those areas. I'll show you how we're gonna do that. And then when we're done, right now, this whole part of the car should be level. It should be straight. Everything should be done for the next phase. Like I said, that's why we're gonna now recoat it in a 2K. I did hit on this hood. You can see this hood was a brand new hood. Look at all the body work needed on this hood. Like I said, all the green dolphin glaze areas, those were the low spots. They're just waves in these parts. I mean, it doesn't matter. This is a good quality hood. I'm not even gonna say the manufacturer. It's just, this is what you're gonna have to do to a good quality job, even though the car looks straight. So be prepared for this. There are a couple spots I did break out right here. You see it's really defined gray. I came back through with some epoxy and just dusted in the very small, they're about quarter dime size spots. So that's why the next phase on this, you'll see at the end of the video, we're gonna put a 2K high build on there. So it's not gonna be as high build as a slick sand, but that starts our whole process over again and gets us a unified platform again that we start blocking. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's go ahead and start blocking this car. So the rotisserie, I really recommend you doing this on a rotisserie. As you can see, this is a lengthy process. You don't want to be, I mean, I've done it on your back, blocking cars, reaching down. It's very tiring and cumbersome. And I don't think the job really comes as good versus the car always being at a comfortable level where you're blocking and you can look down and see the car. So what we're gonna do, this is the side we're gonna do. The whole passenger side is the only side left. We've already done up here forward, but let's blow this car off real quick. And then let's go ahead, I'll show you, we're gonna lay our guide coat down and I'll show you how we start blocking. Also, I want to reiterate with your air, you want clean, non-oil, dry air. You really do not want to be blowing the water. We have a special air dryer on this system and tons of oil separators. So that's also very crucial. But what we're going to do, I'm going to take our guide coat. I use a dry guide coat. When we were spraying the slick sand, your first coat, you could go ahead and spray on some guide coat there too. So we're gonna apply this. Right now, I'm gonna take this car in sections. We're not panel to panel gap in the car, but we're gonna try to start that. If it doesn't line up perfect and everything's not exactly perfect, I'll show you what we're gonna do. But right now, the car's close enough. Let's see what we got with it. So just lay on the guide coat. You see it gets real dark charcoal right over the area that we're gonna end up body working. And what I'm doing up here, because I didn't do this area, we're gonna roll this corner right around. So I'm taking this car in sections is what we're doing here. Also, one more thing I went over on the last video. There's a real rough spot. You'll see, I'm gonna start blocking here first just to show you. A bug landed, a giant bug landed right there, and I picked it out and then covered over it real heavy. So that's why this area is gonna look really bad when we start blocking it. So I'll show you that first. All right, so now what we're gonna do, I should have had my block set up, but we'll rip the old sandpaper off the block that's been sitting there for a week. What I like to do, I'll just go over it real quick for the first time. And like I said, I've done this on our videos. Take some lacquer thinner, throw it on the block. With this car too, I'm wearing gloves. So anytime I really touch it, we don't want the oils from our hands soaking up into the car. So take a razor blade, just clean off the block. You don't want the glue on the block because then you're gonna get an uneven blocking surface. At this point, and what we're trying to fine tune, everything has to be straight to make the body work straight. We're trying for close to perfection. I mean, the owner, this car, he wants it to look somewhat factory, a little bit better. It doesn't have to be a trailer queen, but we want this car to look straight when it leaves here. So let me go get a scissor real quick. I gotta cut my sandpaper, so I'll use the razor blade. Usually I have a pair of scissors on here, but we got the razor blade, so we'll use that. So we got our sticky back sandpaper. We're gonna use our first block. Like I said, I like to usually hit it with a longer block first, see where we're at, and then come back through with the shorter blocks to pick it up. I don't want to go too long either, especially with the curvature. Like I said, let's start on this door, let's start blocking and see where we're at.
To verify, we're using 180 grit sandpaper. You can use 220. I just feel like cutting the top down to 180 is better on the first round.
All right, first go around, you can see we just started uncovering the surface. You could see our low spots. This is basically could be just in the priming texture on the coats I put on. Don't forget, this car had 2 gallons of slick sand put on it throughout the whole car. It's a lot of polyester primer, but you could see we're starting to block the orange peel out. Gets a little bit low there. Again, this stuff builds so high, all this should start coming out. We're not really, at this point, it's not showing us anything. It just shows we gotta keep blocking. We're going from the body line up. Right now, I'm not taping the body lines because we're not worried about that crisp edge yet. We're mostly, like I said, just focused on the panels that we didn't body work and the waves in the panels and finding any imperfections that I can. So let's keep blocking it. And when we start hitting our epoxy, then I'll stop again and show you what we're gonna end up doing.
You could see with my block, I'm going about 45, 60 degree angles. I'm alternating it left and right just to make sure we're cross hatching and not creating deep gouges in it. And it's a very light touch on this block.
All right, where we're at. I extended it onto the fender. What I'm doing, I'm pretty much going everywhere where this block will block comfortably. You could see right here, when I start hitting the curvature, we start losing the block. So we're gonna stop there, and that's down the road in time lapse. We'll switch to another block, but I don't know if you could see it. You could see the little dark spots. Anywhere dark, the color of our guide coat that's still on there, we need to keep blocking. But if you could just ever so slightly, right there, there's a hint of gray starting to come out. So as I'm blocking right here, what I wanna do, I wanna more focus my block down here now. Again, I know I said usually you were supposed to be going top to panel to bottom panel, but right here it's built up higher. So we want to kind of blend our strokes, focusing on those areas without taking it in this area, because really the center of this fender, you can see there's a gray starting to come out here. Right here, it's a hint of gray, and right here, if we keep blocking, we're gonna start hitting bare metal. So this is where we wanna stop. And if you watch the last video, what I was doing, I was just exposing the bare metal because we're putting a ton of filler on it, and then we're sanding all the filler off. So when we expose the bare metal, we know we're not leaving too much on there. At this point though, we know that this car, everything's close enough. We're trying not to expose the bare metal. So you can see right here in this fender, there's a really low spot, but I feel like with this area still being really high right here, we should be able to blend this out. Same thing up here. There's a spot there and a spot there. These are all these, if we don't block this area out, well, those will be the waves you see. If you look down the side of the car, the light reflecting off of it. So same thing, I kind of just stopped down here because again, we're starting to lose the block with the shape of the car down here. So this will probably be where we tackle it with that door block. But let's continue using this block. Let's keep going, and then let me finish exposing it. Like I said, so with the block, we're not pushing it, we're not cutting, we're using the block. I'll show you just a cut ever so slightly. We're letting the sandpaper do the work. Cross hatch pattern, and we're putting our hands evenly spaced. We don't want to be on one side of the block and have this side, we're letting the block shape the car. That's why we're picking the block for the car. Like I said, at this point, we're gonna focus more down here. So let's keep blocking a little bit more, and then when we come back, we should be able to fill one or two of these smaller spots in with dolphin glaze. But you see the benefit of really blocking in the edges and do our major body work, it's really paying off right now in the 2 gallons of slick sand, because yeah, there's waves in the car, but at this point, we're really working them all out. You could really see what we first started blocking, how all the deviation in the panels and, you know, from the primer, the different coats going on there and just the work underneath till right now, where we're starting to get a roadmap of the really high and the really low spots. So that's what we're finding out. We only should only have to address a couple of them, but let's keep getting at it and see what we come up with.
As you're blocking down this car, you have to remember the whole process that you came up to this point. I was extra heavy on this body line, knowing that it needed a little bit of work anyway, so I really did pack in the slick sand, and I'm sure when the car was laying straight, it laid in that edge a little bit harder. And I think that's why those areas are taking a little bit longer to block out, and I have to focus on them a little bit more.
All right, let's look at our roadmap now. So I came all the way down here because actually all this blocked out really well. I mean, I have one spot right here that I need to address. I did break out in 3 spots. Like I said, it's gonna happen. You can see right there, it's a high spot. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but that also exposes our low spot, which is right here. We also hit another high spot right there. That's how I know this is a low spot, when it's surrounded by 2 high spots. So right here, we're chasing the gray primer up. So right now, we're not gonna put any filler on here knowing it's a high spot. We know this is a high spot surrounded by filler. We're not gonna touch that. I mean, surrounded by epoxy, not filler, the gray is epoxy. And then right here is our low spot on the door. You could see the body line on the Challenger should be going straight and then curving up. What it's doing, it's going straight, dipping down right here, and then coming back up. Obviously, we're completely exaggerating this, but that's what we're here to address. So same thing right here, high spot right here, high spot right here. That means our very minor low spot is right there. So we're gonna go ahead and address those low spots right now on camera, and then we're gonna go ahead and get back to the work. So like I said, what we're gonna do first, we have to find our high spot, our high spots around it. We want to sand our low spot. We do not want to put filler on top of the guide coat. So we're going to sand it. Same thing with the 180. Now I'm going to extend it up in here just to kind of go over everything. So I'm going to circle it with the sandpaper. That's going to be our first spot. Our second spot is right here. And our third spot is right here. We still have a little bit of work to do down here on the edge, and you can see the edges are usually what you're gonna burn through the first. I'm not super worried about the edges. I also did burn through on this edge right here, and what I did off camera or in the middle of filming, I took it and I hit this area down just because looking down the body line, it wasn't shaped right. So we're gonna have to cover this with epoxy and then come back through. We're gonna refix this edge right here. This is part of the bodywork fig. So let's blow off our excess sand from our, our dust from our sandpaper. And what I was saying too about panel to panel, we're gonna come into this quarter panel, but again, if we're a little bit off, it's not the end of the world. Also, the door slightly moves. So if we're sanding it, we're not getting a very good panel to panel sand scratch. So if you want a panel to panel, these two really have to be almost glued together so doors aren't moving. But we're gonna flow across them, and then I'll focus on kind of what I did on this one. Just focus mostly on this panel, overlapping a little bit, then I'll focus on just a quarter. So let's tape this area off. So the tape is just to be clean and make sure we don't have any area. I gotta sand it just a little bit more. So yeah, we still see some guide coat in there. Let's sand it. We're gonna tape off our areas. We don't want the dolphin glaze to go. So that would obviously be the body line, the door jamb, and we don't want it on the door handle. All right, so we're gonna mix our dolphin glaze up. We have our onion board. We'll get a fresh sheet. I said, here's our dolphin glaze. We're gonna use one of these spreaders that we're gonna be able to get a good smooth curvature. I try to stick with the metal spreaders unless we're on a real heavily curved area. So this dolphin glaze, if you watched our last video, comes out and it's real runny in a sense compared to the filler itself. I think I used some on the Bodywork 101 video if you've seen others, but as far as this car, on the last video, we did not use any dolphin glaze. It was just filler. So it mixes just like the regular filler, and I usually just do a part like that. And you can see it's already running down. So this is gonna self-level and lay out really nice compared to the filler we were using before, which was also smooth, but we had to work it more. Now, this is not a higher build filler, high volume filler like the Rage Ultra. So this is very thin. When we put it on, it's obviously thicker than the polyester, but it's nothing like actual filler. If you have major body work that needs to be done, this is not the filler to be using. This is, like I said, it's a medium between the polyester, and it's actually almost just barely thicker than the polyester, so just a hair up above it. If you have major work, you need to go back to the Rage Ultra, but in this step, you really shouldn't be if the metal work's all done right. So you can see I'm spreading it out. We get it on a separate color. We're not stirring it. It's very similar to mixing it like the regular Rage Ultra and other fillers. So now that we got it, let's put it on our putty knife, and we'll do this area first. You can see how it's gonna self-level. We're gonna try to stay away from that area a little bit. Like I said, it's not the end of the world. Got a little bit of dried up stuff on the putty knife. The idea is to get this on as smooth as possible. Grab another putty knife. That one had a little piece of dried up stuff on, but you could even see, even with that, it started to self-level. So then let's put our, like I said, I'm going a little bit heavy. We're gonna block it all back out. I'd rather just do this once and have a little bit much. This does not block out. It's not the end of the world, but it does not block out as easy as the Rage Ultra, as far as how fast it's blocking. So like I said, if you have major body work, you need to go back to the Rage Ultra. That's gonna save you time and money. This is just for these fine details. And you can see right there, we mixed a pretty decent amount. We almost have none left. Just to go over a recap, actually, let me go get some paper towels real quick. We'll wipe this off and lacquer thinner. So paper towels, wipe off the dolphin glaze. Get as much of it off we can. We don't care about the onion board. We're gonna throw out that piece. Once we get most of that off, we could sit there, take our lacquer thinner before it dries. And that's clean. So let's do this one now. Same thing. I will say too, if you do get, if it does harden up on you a little bit, you could take, with the lacquer thinner, you take the razor blade and scrape it. But you can see it's having a hard time coming off. It's starting to set up. So a little bit of lacquer thinner will loosen it up. we want to try to get it off before it hardens. You can see there's 2 spots right there. We'll just take our razor blade and a cleaner razor blade. And there was our spot right there that I missed on another time. All right, so our spreaders are clean. We go back and now we'll pull our tape off before it hardens. So it gives us a good edge. I didn't block the top yet, so that's why I didn't bother roll. I don't want to worry about the top. And you can see we're going to come back through, clean that edge up, and you can see it's already starting to set. So what we're going to do, we'll come back once this dries. I'll show you how we start blocking this, and really the rest of this video we'll put in some time lapse, but this is going to be the process on the whole side. So let's let this dry, come back, block this out, and blend it in. I'll show you how we do that, and let's get back to it. All right, so as you can see, it's been about 10 minutes or so, and the dolphin glaze is dry. I don't have gloves on now, I'm not gonna block with gloves, but I'm also not gonna touch the car. So that's kind of the idea. If I don't have gloves on, I try to be aware that I'm not touching my car, putting oils into the filler, which is a sponge at this point. While we were waiting, obviously, we just went and we started blocking the back quarter panel. Just gotta keep moving on the car, just become efficient. I mean, you could sit there and stare at this and watch paint dry, but like I said, you could jump around in a car. It's about 10, 20 minutes is a good time to block the dolphin glaze. So let's get to blocking this. I'm gonna put a little bit of guide coat on it. Sometimes the guide coat won't stick to the dolphin glaze initially. You might have to put a tooth on it. We're mostly worried about the edges because what we're trying to do now, we wanna block the dolphin glaze out so it's straight, but we also wanna make sure we don't have a ridge come stepping up or stepping down to what our base coat was in the back. So how you'll know the ridge is gone is while you're blocking, you won't see any more black around it. So like I said, we're gonna hit those areas. We're probably gonna expose that metal a little bit more, but we're aware of it. And this is why we got a 2K down the road. So I'll show you that process, but we're trying our best at this point not to expose the metal. So let's get the mask on. Let's start blocking real quick.
If you want to tackle this dolphin glaze with 150 to start the cut, that's also an option.
Real quick, I'm going to choose this block because it's a little bit stiffer for the shaping. Then we'll work our way to the door block to kind of follow that curve a little bit more.
If you do decide on a coarser grit sandpaper, just make sure you're back to the 180 to 220 following the TDS when you start reaching the slick sand, or the slick sand's not going to do the job it was designed for.
All right, so this is a good spot where I could go off camera, but I could show you what's going on. So as you can see, there's a dark area right here between the dolphin glaze and the polyester filler. That right there is our ridge line that I was telling you about. You could see right here, we're not seeing any more guide coat. It's coming down and it blends in with the sanding scratches. So this area is transitioned really well. We obviously still have to block up here. It's black. So we'll keep hitting that area. And then same thing right here. We're gonna have to come back down on the door. And of course, I just hit this once or twice, but we'll have to do this whole area. So that's the idea with the dolphin glaze. This is right here what you're looking for. A smooth transition, no more low spots, and no metal around it. So this would be an acceptable repair right here. We have to, I know our major area was up here. So we'll keep working this whole area and we'll just time lapse the rest of the car, kind of show you what's going on, and we'll get to the 2K coming up. So stay tuned. Let's get to some more blocking on this car.
To just go over the TDS on the slick sand, since we went over it on the last video as we applied it, but right now the TDS is still just as important on the slick sand as it is when you're spraying it, because this is the product we're using. We are preparing this product following the TDS and what its substrates are. So the substrate that we chose under this slick sand is going to be epoxy primer. The epoxy primer was on bare metal. So we know now anything we top coat in this stuff is only good as your base material. So the bare metal epoxy primer is the best glue to bare metal. Now, following the TDS, we know the slick sand is compatible and designed to go over epoxy primer. So we're following the TDS there. Then, after about a month or so, we let everything shrink up. Again, following the TDS and how we're supposed to sand it. Then we started sanding the slick sand, as you're seeing right now, with 180 grit. Like I said, you can also run this with 220. I know we're gonna come back over with a high build primer, so that's why we're going to do the 180, because we're also following the TDS on that product.
All right, so we're getting ready. We're back on the Challenger. It's been about a week or so. We got the car blocked out. What I ended up doing, I did work this body line on both sides a little bit more after I blocked it out and just tightened everything from here to here. And just like I said, looking down the car, we're just dialing in everything on the bodywork. That's the point of this video. You could also see I then, as soon as I was done, went through the whole car, and everywhere that I might have had a small spot that broke out, I just sprayed a little bit of epoxy primer on just to seal it up. What I've done since then, too, where we are at on the video, we're getting ready to prep for our 2K high build primer. So that's gonna be the next step in what we're doing. We'll go over that in a little bit. But what I ended up doing, I went on 220 on a DA sander, and we're gonna scuff the whole entire car with a backing pad, so an interference pad. So you can see it kind of presses down. I've already done the top of this car and the bottom of this car. You can actually see the difference on the epoxy right here, how not like shiny it is. This has more of a sheen to it. Same thing with here, where up here, the epoxy's not as dull. Now, watching the TDS on our high build primer, it says that we need to use between a 180 to 220 scratch. Why do we pick 220 on the DA? And before you jump on the comments and say we're using a DA sanded after we spent all the time hand blocking this car with stiff blocks. We're not going to go over this light. You're going to see we're going to use a very fine touch. And what we're doing, we're trying to just put a circular scratch, because everything we did was straight line blocking. And to me, a 220 is going to just even out our scratches a little bit, make the high build not, more effective in the next route. And like I said, we're not digging in. That's the whole point of interference pad. It's just put a light scuff. And same thing, this epoxy, since it's out of its chemical adhesion window, will need to be scuffed up. So that's another main reason we have to use a DA sand. So to me, it's easier to just one over the car. Also, we're going to one over the car because the car's been sitting, like I said, we've been doing this process for a few weeks now. At this point, this is going to clean up and give us fresh exposed filler to accept the new filler. We're just, again, taking off the top end of it. And what we're doing with this, we're going to have more discrepancies with our spray pattern on our high build filler as we're building it different. So we're gonna block it again. So we're not super worried about that. Let me show you how we're gonna go ahead and do this. Again, like I said, 220 on the DA. I'm going slow on the DA. Our main focus is we're gonna focus on the epoxy. And then once we're done, we're gonna clean up this car. We're gonna clean out all the dust. We're gonna tape up the car, and we're gonna just get ready for the high build. What I am gonna do too, you'll see it back when I come on the video, there is a couple areas you can see right here that has a little bit of bare metal still exposed. We're gonna come in tonight. Again, it's more towards the end of the day before we close up. We're going to spot in those areas that are bare metal. And what that's going to do, we're going to be now in the chemical adhesion of that epoxy. So the old epoxy will be scuffed up. The new epoxy will be in the chemical adhesion window. So let's go ahead and DA this side. The only part we got to do is this area down the center of the car. You'll see how the process goes, and we'll work from there.
Before we actually put this into time lapse and I speed it up, I just want to show you how slow we're going, how little pressure I'm using on it with the interference pad and the scratch we're putting into it. I am focused more on the epoxy itself, trying to get a better tooth on the epoxy. I'm trying to also keep a uniform motion so I know where I've already gone. And I like to go in different directions just because, same thing, I feel like you miss less that way. I'm also rolling the body line and transitioning it into the quarter panel.
So that's basically the process and what we're doing. You can see how dull it got, and now we got a really good scratch there. What I do focus on the epoxy, knowing that we just sprayed that on anyway to make sure it's all smooth out and we don't have any sheen exposed to it. So let me finish blocking this and we'll go ahead and we'll tape up the car, and then we'll go over the high build primer.
So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to start back taping the entire Challenger. What we're trying to do, we're going to seal out the inside of the car, and everywhere there's gray epoxy primer, that's not the external body, and we do not want the 2K high build primer on there to block out. There's a couple reasons for this. One, I think it's going to keep our primer surface on the outside a lot cleaner. Don't forget, we've been sanding on this car for a few weeks now and there's dust everywhere. Yes, we did clean out as best we can, but as in any body shop, just the dust lingers in all the cracks, crevices, and everything of this car. If we could keep out the dust from exposing from the inside out in all those gaps and just leave the outside body exposed, that's going to be a whole lot cleaner of the job when it's over. Another reason to keep the job cleaner, we don't really want our high build epoxy going on the inside. Don't forget, all that epoxy primer on the inside of this car has been there for months. At that point, where it's obviously not going to hear new paint surfaces apply to it. So if some overspray and particulates off the 2K are floating in the air and it's already dried as it's landing on something, it's just going to create more stuff you have to sand off in the future, and it's not a good adhesion surface. So I just think back taping the whole inside and this little bit, a couple hours, an hour or so to tape this thing is just well worth the outcome of the project. Again, it's the little things like this that just make your life so much easier in the bodywork phase. You could see we just basically back taped everywhere we don't want. We're going to put our plastic sheathing over the Challenger, and then what we're going to do is just push our areas down where our tape has been back taped, come back through with a razor blade, and we're cutting out the body of the car itself, leaving the windows and the areas we don't want taped off still hanging and exposed. And then what I'll do, since this Challenger does have some dust on the inside, we did use wax and grease remover on the epoxy areas we were going to tape, but we didn't use it on the body itself. I do not like to use wax and grease remover over filler and porous materials. I feel like it soaks in and can lead to issues down the road. Instead of doing that, I personally like to wear gloves and just not add waxes and greases and oils into the work area. So what I'll end up doing, I'll come back through on the front side and sometimes on the back side and just put a couple extra pieces of tape, just knowing that it might have a hard time sticking. What I also am going to do for the bottom of this car, we're going to fold up the bottom and tape off the whole bottom for that same reason. What I'm doing right now, again, following our TDS, this whole area is like a roadmap. You got to think about with bodywork, where you're starting and where you're going to go. You got to be looking 5 steps down the road while you're preparing for your product right now, and the transitions on products, because you're really not just looking for one TDS. In this video, for instance, we're going off the Slick Sand TDS and then transitioning it to the Omni MP282 TDS. So between those two surfaces, what we're doing right now, we followed our preparation on our sanding and our scuffing of our 220 grit off the DA sander, and then that's going to follow the TDS of the Omni, which accepts a 180 to 240 grit on old finishes. So what we ended up doing with that, you saw with the DA, sanded it down. Then I came back through the night prior, and then I used Omni MP170, which is also an acceptable epoxy on both TDSs, and I filled up any bare metal. Both these surfacers, these primers, do not want to go on bare metal. So we got to make sure, you saw I was looking with this car over a fine-tooth comb and just making sure no bare metal top to bottom on this car was exposed. Then I just let the car sit overnight. That's going to give us, in the wintertime, a lot extra flash time. Again, we're watching our Omni MP170 now TDS. We know that epoxy has a 3-day window of a chemical adhesion. So like I said, if you're not familiar with these products, you're going to have TDS sheets just spread out. I would keep them in order, and you keep referring back to them and just build the process. So back to the video, and the last part that we're spraying is our Omni MP283 High Build 2K Primer Surfacer. So we are using this as a spray filler. So we're going to mix this with a MP282 4 parts to a MH283 1 part. So that's going to give us a little more build, which I feel this car still needs. Down the road, you might see we might use this MP282 and just need a little bit smaller of an area. So we'll also add the MR180X reducer at a 1 part. So that'll be a 4:1:1, and it'll just lay on the car a little bit slicker as we get ready for the sealer. But we'll add that down the road. Let's take a quick walk around on what we come up with and how this primer laid out.
So we're 24 hours since we sprayed our 2K High Build primer. What we're going to do, we're going to let this sit for 2 weeks and shrink up, especially now since we're in the colder months of the year. You could probably start blocking it in a week. I mean, the TDS says a few hours. I like to let everything shrink up. Like I said in the past, the restoration industry, to do high-end jobs, is not a rush job. So what we're going to do, like I said, we're going to let it sit for 2 weeks. Looking at it, the car looks really good. We really dialed in everything on the car. So on the next video, when we start blocking it down, and you'll see we're going to use a finer grit sandpaper, and we should be able to cut through this thing a lot faster and not have to worry about all the imperfections we initially came up with. There's 2 spots on the car that I already know, now that everything is a blank canvas again and everything is white, that I can look in the lights and just staring at this thing for a couple hours while it was drying and everything, that I know that I want to address. For instance, this corner right here, I just want to sharpen it up a little bit. I could see how it's just not following the hard, sharp radii of everything else. So, and that might be cutting this edge down on the fender, or, you know, it might be building up that, and we're talking, this is just the fine-tuning details. And same thing on the other side. I just don't like how one of the body lines transition. So, but besides that, looking down the rest of the body lines of this car as we're rolling it, everything looks really good. I will, next time spraying this high build primer, I think we're going to try a 1.6 tip. We did get a little bit of dry spray at the top, and I could tell the gun was struggling. Now, when it wasn't dry spraying and I cleaned the gun out, it laid everything down really slick. So that's going to be one of those experimental times, and that also has to do a lot with weather, humidity, everything else like that. So we might go with a 1.6 tip next time, and the weather conditions might not be ideal for that. So like I said, that's where we're at on this car. Looking around the other side, everything looks really good. Everything laid out really smooth. I don't see other major issues on the car. It really looks good to see this Challenger now come together in one color again. So we're gonna start protecting it. We're gonna kind of cover it up, let it gas out for a little bit, and we're gonna, like I said, let it sit. We'll come back with the next video, start blocking it. You can see there is some, in looking around too, there's a couple bugs that landed. There's some dirt. We did our best to tape it up to keep it out. Saying that, where we're at on this car and why we haven't been rushing it is it will be painted in our paint booth. We're upgrading. We're making a new paint booth. It's about 80% operational right now. So the paint job and the major stuff when we're coming towards the end of this car and really not wanting to get the dirt in it, that we're not blocking that much out of it, all that will start to be done in the clean environment. So that's kind of why we haven't rushed this project. The owner knows that, and that was another reason why we agreed to the timeline and everything else. But like I said, we will be back on this car. It's really getting there. We're making forward progress. We got the 73 Challenger next to us that we are also going to put some bodywork videos out. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully, like you said, this is one idea of doing the process. It's not the only way of doing the process, but I think for where this car started and where we're trying to get to with this car, I think this is the best route for everything on this car. So if it hopefully this video helps you. If it does, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. You know, the YouTube algorithm doesn't like a lot of our, you know, educational videos. We don't get as many views as some of the popular channels just do a bunch of burnouts and everything. And again, I'm not hating on it. Just if you can help, the like, the comment, and the subscribe does help us and put the information out to more and more people. Another thing too, go check out, I've been saying it in the last few videos, my buddy Eddy's charity, eddybear.org, where he does a toy drive, stuffed animal donations for kids in need. So that's a really cool thing, and I like to really try to push the message out on that. We're not affiliated with the charity, but we are, like I said, it's something I do believe in, and I think he's doing a great thing. So please check him out, eddybear.org. If you are donating animals to the address listed below, feel free to make sure they're brand new, they're unwrapped, and the tags are still on them. So again, send them that. And again, hopefully this video helped you out. If you like this stuff, please let us know what you think. If you have other ideas on how to make, you know, the body work on these videos better, feel free to comment. Like I said, we've taken suggestions in the past, and every day the process changes. So again, we might come back in another year on a different car and say, okay, well, we've done this and we've learned and we're moving on to this. But as of right now, I feel like the process is going real well. So stay tuned for more of that. I'm Rex from Cartridge Classic Cars, and we'll see you in the next video.